Psychopathia Sexualis by Richard von Krafft-Ebing. Case 131, Gynandry. History. On November 4, 1889, the stepfather of a certain Count Sandor V complained that the latter had swindled him out of 800 francs under the pretense of requiring a bond as secretary of a stock company. It was ascertained that Sandor had entered into matrimonial contracts and escaped from the nuptials in the spring of 1889, and, more than this, that this ostensible Count Sandor was no man at all, but a woman in male attire, Sarolta, Charlotte, Countess V. S. was arrested and, on account of deception and forgery of public documents, brought to examination. At the first hearing, S. confessed that she was born on September 6, 1866, that she was a female, Catholic, single, and worked as an authoress under the name of Count Sandor V. From the autobiography of this man-woman, I have gleaned the following remarkable facts that have been independently confirmed. S. comes from an ancient, noble, and highly respected family of Hungary, in which there have been eccentricity and family peculiarities. A sister of the maternal grandmother was hysterical, a somnambulist, and lay 17 years in bed on account of fancied paralysis. A second great-aunt spent 7 years in bed on account of a fancied fatal illness, and at the same time gave balls. A third had the whim that a certain table in her salon was bewitched. If anything were laid on this table, she would become greatly excited and cry, "Bewitched! Bewitched!" and run with the object into a room which she called the Black Chamber, and the key of which she never let out of her hands. After the death of this lady, there were found in this chamber a number of shawls, ornaments, banknotes, etc. A fourth great-aunt, during 2 years, did not leave her room, and neither washed herself nor combed her hair. Then she again made her appearance. All these ladies were, nevertheless, intellectual, finely educated, and amiable. S.'s mother was nervous, and could not bear the light of the moon. From her father's family, it is said she had a trace too much. One line of the family gave itself up almost entirely to spiritualism. 2 blood relations on the father's side shot themselves. The majority of her male relatives are unusually talented. The females are decidedly narrow and domestic. As his father had a high position, which, however, on account of his eccentricity and extravagance, he wasted over 1.5 million, he lost. Among many foolish things that her father encouraged in her was the fact that he brought her up as a boy, called her Sandor, allowed her to ride, drive, and hunt, admiring her muscular energy. On the other hand, this foolish father allowed his second son to go about in female attire and had him brought up as a girl. This farce ceased in his 15th year, when the son was sent to a higher school. Sarolta Sandor remained under her father's influence till her 12th year, and then came under the care of her eccentric maternal grandmother in Dresden, by whom, when the masculine play became too obvious, she was placed in an institute and made to wear female attire. At 13, she had a love relation with an English girl, to whom she represented herself as a boy, and ran away with her. Sarolta returned to her mother, who, however, could do nothing, and was compelled to allow her daughter to again become Sandor, wear male clothes, and, at least once a year, to fall in love with persons of her own sex. At the same time, S. received a careful education, and made long journeys with her father, of course, always as a young gentleman. She early became independent, and visited cafes, even those of doubtful character, and, indeed, boasted one day that in a brothel she had had a girl sitting on each knee. S. was often intoxicated, had a passion for masculine sports, and was a very skillful fencer. She felt herself drawn particularly toward actresses, or others of similar position, and, if possible, toward those who were not very young. She asserts that she never had any inclination for a young man, and that she has felt, from year to year, an increasing dislike for young men. I prefer to go into the society of ladies with ugly, ill-favored men, so that none of them could put me in the shade. If I noticed that any of the men awakened the sympathies of the ladies, I felt jealous. I preferred ladies who were bright and pretty. I could not endure them if they were fat or much inclined toward men. It delighted me if the passion of a lady was disclosed under a poetic veil. All immodesty in a woman was disgusting to me. I had an indescribable aversion for female attire, indeed for everything feminine, but only in as far as it concerned me, for, on the other hand, I was all enthusiasm for the beautiful sex. During the last 10 years, S had lived almost constantly away from her relatives in the guise of a man. She had had many liaisons with ladies, traveled much, spent much, and made debts. At the same time, she carried on literary work and was a valued collaborator on 2 noted journals of the capital. Her passion for ladies was very changeable. Constancy in love was entirely wanting. Only once did such a liaison last 3 years. It was years before that S, at Castle G, made the acquaintance of Emma E., who was 10 years older than herself. She fell in love with her, made a marriage contract with her, and they lived together, as man and wife, for 3 years at the capital. A new love, which S regarded as a fate, caused her to sever her matrimonial relations with E. The latter would not have it so. Only with the greatest sacrifice was S able to purchase her freedom from E, who, it is reported, still looks upon herself as a divorced wife, and regards herself as the Countess the Fifth. That S also had the power to excite passion in other women is shown by the fact that when she, before her marriage with E, had grown tired of a Miss D, after having spent thousands of guldens on her, she was threatened with shooting by D if she should become untrue. It was in the summer of 1887, while at a watering place, that S made the acquaintance of a distinguished official's family. Immediately she fell in love with the daughter, Marie, and her love was returned. Her mother and cousin tried in vain to break up this affair. During the winter, the lovers corresponded zealously. In April 1888, Count S paid her a visit, and in May 1889 attained her wish, in that Marie, who, in the meantime, had given up a position as teacher, became her bride in the presence of a friend of her lover, the ceremony being performed in an arbor by a false priest in Hungary. S, with her friend, forged the marriage certificate. The pair lived happily, and, without the interference of the stepfather, this false marriage, probably, would have lasted much longer. It is remarkable that, during the comparatively long existence of the relation, S was able to deceive completely the family of her bride with regard to her true sex. S was a passionate smoker, and in all respects her tastes and passions were masculine. Her letters and even legal documents reached her under the address of Count S. She often spoke of having to drill. From remarks of the father-in-law, it seems that S, and she afterward confessed it, knew how to imitate a scrotum with handkerchiefs or gloves stuffed in the trousers. The father-in-law also, on one occasion, noticed something like an erected member on his future son-in-law, probably a priapus. She also occasionally remarked that she was obliged to wear a suspensory bandage while riding. The fact is, S wore a bandage around the body, possibly as a means of retaining a priapus. Though S often had herself shaved pro forma, the servants in the hotel where she lived were convinced that she was a woman, because the chambermaids found traces of menstrual blood on her linen, which S explained, however, as hemorrhoidal. And, on the occasion of a bath which S was accustomed to take, they claimed to have convinced themselves of her real sex by looking through the keyhole. The family of Marie made it seem probable that she for a long time was deceived with regard to the true sex of her false bridegroom. The following passage in a letter from Marie to S, August 26, 1889, speaks in favor of the incredible simplicity and innocence of this unfortunate girl. I don't like children anymore, but if I had a little Bezerel or Patcherel by my Sandy, what happiness, Sandy mine. A large number of manuscripts allow conclusions to be drawn concerning S's mental individuality. The chirography possesses the character of firmness and certainty. The characters are genuinely masculine. The same peculiarities repeat themselves everywhere in their contents. Wild, unbridled passion, hatred and resistance to all that opposes the heart thirsting for love, poetical love, which is not marred by one ignoble blot, enthusiasm for the beautiful and noble, appreciation of science and the arts. Her writings betray a wonderfully wide range of reading in classics of all languages, in citations from poets and prose writers of all lands. The evidence of those qualified to judge literary work shows that S.'s poetical and literary ability is by no means small. The letters and writings concerning the relation with Mary are psychologically worthy of notice. S speaks of the happiness there was for her when by M's side, and expresses boundless longing to see her beloved, if only for a moment. After such a happiness, she could have but one wish, to exchange herself for the grave. The bitterest thing was the knowledge that now Marie, too, hated her. Hot tears, enough to drown herself in, she had shed over her lost happiness. Whole choirs of paper are given up to the apotheosis of this love, and reminiscences of the time of the first love and acquaintance. S complained of her heart that would allow no reason to direct it. She expressed emotions which were such as only could be felt, not simulated. Then again, there were outbreaks of most silly passion, with a declaration that she could not live without Marie. Thy dear sweet voice, the voice whose tone perchance would raise me from the dead, that has been for me like the warm breath of paradise. Thy presence alone were enough to alleviate my mental and moral anguish. It was a magnetic stream. It was a peculiar power your being exercised over mine, which I cannot quite define, and therefore I cling to that ever-true definition. I love you because I love you. In the night of sorrow I had but one star, the star of Marie's love. That star has lost its light. Now there remains but its shimmer, the sweet, sad memory which even lights with its soft ray the deepening night of death, a ray of hope. This writing ends with the apostrophe. Gentlemen, you learned in the law, psychologists and pathologists, do me justice. Love led me to the step I took. All my deeds were conditioned by it. God put it in my heart. If he created me so, and not otherwise, am I then guilty, or is it the eternal, incomprehensible way of fate? I relied on God, that one day my emancipation would come, for my thought was only love itself, which is the foundation, the guiding principle, of his teaching and his kingdom. O God, thou all-pitying, almighty one, thou seest my distress, thou knowest how I suffer. Incline thyself to me, extend thy helping hand to me, deserted by all the world. Only God is just. How beautifully does Victor Hugo describe this in his Legende du siècle. How sad do Mendelssohn's words sound to me. Nightly in dreams I see thee. Though S knew that none of her writings reached her lover, she did not grow tired writing of her pain and delight in love, in page after page of deification of Marie. And to induce one more pure flood of tears, on one still clear summer evening, when the lake was aglow with the setting sun like molten gold, and the bells of St. Anna and Marie Worth, blending in harmonious melancholy, gave tidings of rest and peace, she wrote, For that poor soul, for this poor heart that beat for thee till the last breath. Personal examination. The first meeting which the experts had with S was, in a measure, a time of embarrassment to both sides. For them, because perhaps S's somewhat dazzling and forced masculine carriage impressed them. For her, because she thought she was to be marked with the stigma of moral insanity. She had a pleasant and intelligent face, which, in spite of a certain delicacy of features and diminutiveness of all its parts, gave a decidedly masculine impression, had it not been for the absence of a mustache. It was even difficult for the experts to realize that they were concerned with a woman, despite the fact of female attire and constant association, while, on the other hand, intercourse with the man Sandor was much more free, natural, and apparently correct. The culprit also felt this. She immediately became more open, more communicative, more free, as soon as she was treated like a man. In spite of her inclination for the female sex, which had been present from her earliest years, she asserts that in her 13th year she first felt a trace of sexual feeling, which expressed itself in kisses, embraces, and caresses with sensual pleasure, and this on the occasion of her elopement with the red-haired English girl from the Dresden Institute. At that time, feminine forms exclusively appeared to her in dream pictures, and ever since, in sensual dreams, she has felt herself in the situation of a man, and occasionally also, at such times, experienced ejaculation. She knows nothing of solitary or mutual onanism. Such a thing seemed very disgusting to her, and not conducive to manliness. She had, also, never allowed herself to be touched ad genitalia by others, because it would have revealed her great secret. The menses began at 17, but were always scanty and without pain. It was plain to be seen that S had a horror of speaking of menstruation, that it was a thing repugnant to her masculine consciousness and feeling. She recognized the abnormality of her sexual inclinations, but had no desire to have them changed, since in this perverse feeling she felt both well and happy. The idea of sexual intercourse with men disgusted her, and she also thought it would be impossible. Her modesty was so great that she would prefer to sleep among men rather than among women. Thus, when it was necessary for her to answer the calls of nature or to change her linen, it was necessary for her to ask her companion in the cell to turn her face to the window that she might not see her. When occasionally S came in contact with this companion, a woman from the lower walks of life, she experienced a sexual excitement that made her blush. Indeed, without being asked, S related that she was overcome with actual fear when, in her cell, she was compelled to force herself into the unusual female attire. Her only comfort was that she was at least allowed to keep a shirt. Remarkable, and what also speaks for the significance of olfactory sensations in her Vita Sexualis, is her statement that, on the occasions of Mary's absence, she had sought those places on which Mary's head was accustomed to repose, and smelled of them, in order to experience the delight of inhaling the odor of her hair. Among women, those who are beautiful, or voluptuous, or quite young, do not particularly interest her. The physical charms of women she makes subordinate, as by magnetic attraction, she feels herself drawn to those between 24 and 30. She found her sexual satisfaction exclusively in corpora feminae, never in her own person, in the form of menustupration of the beloved woman, or cunnilingus. Occasionally she availed herself of a stocking stuffed with oakum as a priapus. These admissions were made only unwillingly by S, and with apparent shame, just as in her writings, immodesty or cynicism are never found. She is religious, has a lively interest in all that is noble and beautiful, men excepted, and is very sensitive to the opinion others may entertain of her morality. She deeply regrets that in her passion she made Mary unhappy, and regards her sexual feelings as perverse, and such a love of one woman for another, among normal individuals, as morally reprehensible. She has great literary talent and an extraordinary memory. Her only weakness is her great frivolity and her incapability to manage money and property reasonably, but she is conscious of this weakness and does not care to talk about it. The opinion given showed that in S there was a congenitally abnormal inversion of the sexual instinct, which indeed expressed itself anthropologically in anomalies of development of the body, depending upon great hereditary taint. Further, that the criminal acts of S had their foundation in her abnormal and irresistible sexuality. S's characteristic expressions, "God put love in my heart. If he created me so, and not otherwise, am I then guilty? Or is it the eternal, incomprehensible way of fate?" are really justified. The court granted pardon. The Countess in male attire, as she was called in the newspapers, returned to her home, and again gave herself out as Count Sandor. Her only distress is her lost happiness with her beloved Marie.